Greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to the Storyteller's Corner. I'm your host, Joshua T. Culkin's Truergy, also known as Byron of Sidious. This is American Minotaur, written by yours truly, Joshua T. Culkin's Truergy. Chapter 9. Mr. Turkin scrutinized the picture on his phone screen for a moment, then looked back at Titus, seated in the living room at Misha's family's house. The cloying, powdery smell of the face paint that Mr. Turkin had applied to give his naturally brown skin a paler complexion stuck in his nose, though he found himself thankful for the scent of the pumpkin pies that Mrs. Turkin had cooling out on their kitchen table, their aroma doing respectable battle for supremacy in his nostrils. "This isn't going to be an exact match, you realize," Mr. Turkin observed. "Yeah, I figured that," Titus said, trying to hold perfectly still while Misha fixed contact dots on his head between and around his horns and ears. "Hey, Mish, the adhesive on those dots, is there a reason it's making my scalp kind of tingle?" "Oh, that's not the adhesive doing that. I'm threading a tiny little bit of mana into them," she explained from behind his shoulders. In front of him, Titus saw Mr. Turkin use one of the clean makeup brushes to dip and swirl into a reddish face paint tin on his little supplies palette, bringing it gently toward Titus's face. "Close your eyes, son. The scar runs right down over the one." Titus did as requested, holding back a loose giggle as the brush tickled his forehead, eyelid, and cheek in its passage. "Now, there's usually a point where someone might ask why we're bothering with all of this stagecraft ahead of time, and I am quite grateful that we've already been through it all with you, Titus. But I'm going to remind my lovely daughter here that we don't want to fumble the handoff, if you will." Titus opened his eyes and smiled toothily at the elven illusionist. "I appreciate the choice of metaphor." "It seems fitting with present company. So, just to quickly quiz you both, when should you step out to maintain the cover illusions, Titus?" "I'll hear a sound in my left ear, like someone snapping their fingers rapidly at me," the Minotaur replied, standing up when Misha tapped him under the left arm lightly. He held his arms out to either side, and she came into view in front of him, walking over to where she'd laid out the folded uniform gi for his costume, modeled off of the Bleach anime character, Kenpachi Zaraki. She brought it over toward him, holding back while her father handed Titus the eye patch, which he dutifully put in place. Misha herself had already done up most of her costume, waiting only to put the pink wig on over her bald cap, under which her real hair had been wrangled with some difficulty. "That's correct," Mr. Turkin said. Titus held his arms out once more, and Misha started pulling his costume on via the right sleeve, adjusting the white overlaid cloak that was part of the character's signature look. The bells on the tip of each spike of the Kenpachi hair jingled slightly as Titus tilted his head to one side, so she could keep hold of the costume as she moved toward his other arm. "Now, for Misha. How many drinks will you be able to imbibe and be able to maintain the efficacy of the illusions once you've taken over the maintenance of the magic?" "3 if I want to keep them at their best, 4 if I'm willing to let a few details blend into the overall effect," she replied after a moment's thought. "But I think the base costumes and makeup are going to give me a leg up on that calculation. So I imagine I'll be able to handle 4 and still keep things looking ideal. It'll start getting wobbly at 5. Her father set aside his palette and folded his arms over his narrow chest, lifting one hand to pull pensively on his bare chin. "You know what? I think you're probably right," he finally said. Misha handed Titus the long white wraps to go around his midsection, and when he was only halfway through wrapping, she snorted. "Give me that," she huffed, putting her hand out. Titus snickered and handed the wrap to her, holding his arms up overhead. When Misha tried reaching around him to unwind what he had done, she let out a defeated little sigh. Ah, right. She walked the wrapping around him to unwind it, and her father started putting away his supplies. Dad, could you grab the sandals for me out of my room? They're on my bed. Sure thing, sweetheart. Misha set to work walking the wrapping around Titus, finally holding up the ends so that he could tie them into the large looped bow in the front. Hey, T? He looked up, saw that Misha was giving him that nervous, lip-biting expression when she had something to tell him that she assumed was going to disturb or annoy him. Yeah? I just wanted to give you a heads up about the party, she continued, looking down at the living room floor. The smell of Mrs. Turkin's pies be damned. He was starting to lose the pleasant mood their aroma put him in each holiday season when he came over for a visit. He twirled one finger for her to get on with it. Jeff's probably going to be there. Without thinking, Titus's hands clenched into fists. Who the fuck invited him? He snarled. And how did you find out? Jeff Lind had been Misha's on-again, off-again boyfriend through most of high school, and for most of that time, he'd been seen as a pretty good guy. The year after graduating high school, however, the couple had gotten into a brief but notable argument when he had, for the third time, cheated on her and been caught in the act. Misha had snuck into his place in order to visit him with the spare key that he'd given her, hoping to surprise him with a visit, and when she heard the noises from the bedroom, she just calmly walked back to the room, threw open the door, and tossed the video game that she'd bought him at the girl who had been mounted on top of him like a frisbee. Jeff's response to this had been to bound up off the bed, stomp over to Misha, and backhand her hard enough to rattle her teeth and send her sprawling to the floor. She never could remember what exactly she had yelled at him after that, only clearly recalling the kick that he'd landed to her shoulder as she started to get up off the floor and back out of his apartment. When she'd seen Titus the next day, and he had asked her about the swelling in her cheek, she had told him the whole story. Titus's reaction had been uncivilized, to put things mildly. He'd been fortunate that Jeff never called the cops or told anyone who had beaten him and thrown him through most of his worldly possessions, resulting in 4 broken ribs, a busted jaw, 2 swollen eyes, a broken nose, and a dislocated shoulder, the very same day Misha told him what had happened to her. Titus had also been fortunate that nobody in Jeff's apartment building had much in the way of community curiosity, because he had roared wordless rage as he had beaten Jeff and dragged him around the apartment. It was as a result of throwing Jeff Lind into his stove at almost full force that the young man had eventually lost his security deposit, since the hinges never got bent back into true shape after the impact. Misha hadn't questioned Titus about what had happened to Jeff, even though she knew what had happened. Titus had happened. Looking at him now, dressed like one of the most volatile, combat-loving characters in all of her known anime, Misha took a fraction of a moment to consider that she had chosen exactly the right character for him to portray. Katie told me a few days ago, Misha said. Becky Kincaid invited him. They used to be friends too, back in the day, and her sister told her she could invite whoever she wanted as long as she kept the head count below 50, since their parents may be out of town, but they don't want the house destroyed for when they get back. Well, shit, Titus said, taking a deep breath and letting it out slowly, letting his body relax a little. Misha turned her head then, spotting the upper tip of her father's ear just visible in the doorframe between the living room and the hallway. All right, I promise I won't start trouble, Mish. I can't afford to anyway. Any kind of legal problems, I can kiss both football and law enforcement goodbye for my future. A few moments later, Mr. Turkin reappeared in the living room and set about chanting the incantations and hand gestures that would conjure up and complete the illusion for Misha and Titus to look convincingly approximate to the bleach characters she had chosen for them. Titus felt the tabs on his head crackle a little in response, and as the spell took hold, he thought about what Ashkar might say, to see his son be the willing target of magic. When Titus pulled onto the lengthy driveway leading up to the Kincaid family home, his first thought was, why the hell would anybody complain about living in a place like this? Back in high school, Becky Kincaid had complained endlessly about living at her parents' house, about the constant noise of Lake Erie's waves lapping against the beach right out in back of the property. To Titus, it felt like a place of natural wonder, which thought led him to thinking about something his biological father had told him during one of their few sit-downs since first meeting. Our people are naturally inclined to two types of environments, Titus. Mountains and the open waters. We're naturally good sailors and fishermen, largely on account of our inborn sense of direction and navigation. He parked the truck next to a slightly smaller, all-black version of his same vehicle, rolling up the windows and climbing out. There were half a dozen people hanging out on the front porch of the lakeside house and the front greenery, all in Halloween costumes of varying quality and source material. Like Titus and Misha, they too were adorned to look like characters from various manga and anime, as was the theme for this particular Halloween shindig. Misha came around the back of his truck and smiled at him, adjusting her pink wig one last time and making a little gesture to him. Titus nodded and crouched down with his back to her, and the half-elf woman clambered up onto his back, wrapping her arms around his thick neck to complete the effect of their team costume. "This is going to be excellent," she whispered into his ear. He reached one arm back to help support her, pushing up on her backside gently. "Agreed. If this gets to feeling too awkward, though, just tell me and I can crouch down to let you off. You know, if you get tired of feeling my hand on your ass." "It's just for long enough for these people to recognize who we're portraying," she answered. "I don't feel that heavy, do I?" "Please, I could do this all night," he said, standing up easily to prove his point. Heading toward the porch, Titus felt a touch of pride on Misha and Mr. Turkin's behalf as the people assembled on the porch pointed and oohed and awed at them as they approached, little bells on the tips of his wig's hair spikes jingling faintly. "Oh, shit! Get Kenny out here!" someone said, and another guest, dressed in a Faye Valentine costume, darted into the house. When Titus and Misha got to the bottom of the porch steps, the messenger came back out, followed immediately by someone who had come to the party in a costume that made him look like Kurosaki Ichigo, also from the anime manga Bleach, the visored hollow mask strapped to his left shoulder. "Dude, you guys fucking nailed it," the young man in the Ichigo costume said, clearly admiring the duo's getup. He squinted a little after a few moments, then rubbed his eyes. "Sorry, something in my eye." "It's a side effect for some folks when they look carefully at illusions," Misha clarified, at which several of their onlookers made noises indicating clarification of their own uncertainty. "My advice? Have a beer." Cheers went up from all gathered at this, several cans and bottles raised in hand, and Titus carried Misha up the steps and through the front door. Music was playing on a sound system of some sort in the front living room, which was as yet only populated by half a dozen guests in colorful attire. Titus noted to himself that the tune selection was a kind of wordless rhythmic techno, and a quick inquiry and pointed finger informed him that the drinks were to be found in the kitchen. He crouched down, Misha hopping off of his back, and when he stood back up, she coiled her hands around his right arm to accompany him to the kitchen. As they stepped into the large, open Kincaid family kitchen, she reflexively squeezed Titus's forearm at the sight of Becky Kincaid. As much as the young woman had a reputation for being less than discerning when it came to keeping the total number of intimate partners in her life to a lower number, it wasn't entirely without cause. Becky was of average height and intelligence in most regards, but she had the long blonde hair and voluptuous figure that tended to garner a lot of male attention. Here at the Halloween party, done up in an almost one-to-one costume of Rangiku Matsumoto, Also from the anime series Bleach, she had the eyeballs of every guy in the kitchen fixed on her. Well, on at least one part of her, Misha thought to herself uncharitably, if accurately. She risked a quick look up at Titus's face, finding, to her surprise, that he did not look best pleased at all. It only took a second to realize why he might be unhappy with Becky. She had invited Misha's ex to this thing, after all. "Becky," Titus rumbled, crooking one finger toward himself and Misha in a come-here move. "A word?" Becky blinked rapidly at him, seemingly stun-locked for a second, before she smiled winningly at her immediate would-be suitors and asking them to excuse her momentarily. She awkwardly made her way over, Misha making note of the character-accurate sandals Becky had on, which did not look comfortable or natural on her in any way, shape, or form. "You guys look amazing," Becky said, putting on the high beams in her chemically treated toothy smile. "Are you using prosthetics?" she asked, reaching toward Titus's face. He drew his head back immediately, his lips peeling back toward his right ear slightly. "Don't touch," he rumbled. Titus looked over at the guys now watching their interaction, thinking to himself, "They're probably wondering if I'm going to torpedo their chances with this woman. Rest easy, fellas, this one's all yours." And aside from the costumes and wigs, no prosthetics. "Just a touch of illusion magic," Misha added with a touch of pride. Sensing that Titus was on the verge of making things awkward, the half-elf woman continued with a question she hoped would serve to distract him. "Where's your sister at? I wanted to thank her for the invite to this." "Oh, right. Tabitha's down in the basement right now in her old bedroom. I think she had to fix part of her costume," Becky said. "Okay, thanks," Misha replied, taking Titus by the hand and pulling him through the kitchen to a hallway on the first floor. Much like Titus's parents' house, it ended to their left in an angled stairway up to the second floor, but it terminated in an open white door with steps leading down into the basement of the house. As she led Titus along, he cleared his throat. "What was that about?" "You were about to lay into her for inviting Jeff, and I don't want to cause a scene," she half-whispered back up at him. "We just got here." Titus allowed himself to be led along, thinking to himself, "Okay, she has a point there. I've got no room to grumble." She came to a stop at the bottom of the steps down into the basement, which was a finished space in the main chamber, a rumpus room that Carl Kincaid had turned into a kind of man cave after his younger daughter had moved out of his house and in with her sister. There was a plain beige panel door on the opposite side of the stairs, standing cracked partway open, music faintly audible playing from within. Misha turned to look up at Titus, his full attention quickly snapping down to her. "Neither of us gets to exactly get out all that much these days, between my part-time work and Rumble streams and you with school and football. I just want us both to have a good time, okay?" She took one of his massive hands in hers, giving it a small squeeze. He smiled down at her in response and nodded. "Good. Now let's go give the hostess a quick hello and go back up and get something to drink." "Okay, lead on," he replied. The duo made their way across the man cave toward the door, with Misha putting one hand up in a wait finger as she got to the doorway, in the event Tabitha was indecent. She poked her head into the bedroom and found Tabitha Kincaid wrestling to lace up the boots that went with her costume, a decent approximation of Major Motoko Kusanagi's formal dress uniform for Section 9 in the anime Ghost in the Shell standalone complex. Misha knocked loudly on the doorframe, and Tabitha looked up and smiled at her, Titus's head looming in over the half-elf's shoulder. "Hey there, Mish, and holy crap, you guys look awesome," Tabitha exclaimed, as the duo stepped into full view in her doorway. Tabitha was seated at her old vanity dresser, a scad of makeup and accoutrements scattered on the top as she sat in a frail-looking white chair, yanking on the laces of her boot. "Did you work in a spell or something for extra effect?" "My dad did, but I'll be taking it over and maintaining in about an hour, I imagine," Misha replied. Tabitha quirked her head to one side, then focused on her laces for about a minute. Magic is one hell of a thing, Tabitha said with a heavy sigh, looking up at Titus and Misha. Titus thought she looked healthier than the last time he had crossed paths with her, which had been just a couple of months earlier at Walmart on one of his weekend shifts. She didn't have the same hollowed-out look that she had had then. There was this guy I was working with over at New Era out there in Angola, And the one day, about a month ago, we're getting set to start the shift, and he pulls me aside into the break room, and he says to me, "Tabby, I can help you, get you off whatever the hell it is that you're on." I kind of tried to play it off, But guys, I was hooked pretty bad through the tooth on coke for about a year and a half, almost 2 years there, she said, looking slightly off to one side of the duo, as if looking into her recollection of the story she was telling them at the moment. I says to him, "Sure, go ahead. If you've got a miracle to call down, do it." And sure enough, this weird blue light covers his hand, and he just, pressed it against my forehead for a couple of seconds. And afterward, I felt weird and lightheaded. And so he just goes back out on the floor, and I head out a few minutes later, and after that shift, I didn't want to score. She flapped her hands and let out an awkward bark of a laugh. I mean, I've heard of people being able to do some pretty neat shit with magic, but this was just unheard of, man. "Chaldean?" Titus asked softly. "Yeah, and an older one, too, brought over here from, the incident, I think. One of those dogmen. What do you call them?" "Kenyan," Misha said. Tabitha snapped her fingers and pointed at her, then popped up onto her feet. "Well, I'm finally all set. Let's go up and grab some brewskis, guys," she said happily. "I may have gotten free of the nose candy, but I'm not going to go all straight edge now." Titus managed to finish his first beer before his cell phone started humming in the left pocket of his shorts, which he had on under his costume pants. Maneuvering his hands quickly under the wraps around his gut, he pulled the phone out and held it toward Misha, then hooked a thumb over his shoulder toward the front door of the house. When he got out on the porch, though, he realized he didn't need to bother answering it. Standing at the bottom of the steps, decked out in ratty jeans, big black boots, worn leather jackets with spiked shoulders and their hair slicked up in spikes, were Henry and Lynn. They stood in front of the side of what Titus assumed was Lynn's oversized panel van, and Henry tucked his phone away, walking toward the young Minotaur and whistling appreciatively. "Damn, dude, that's a killer outfit." "Kind of recognize it, too," the biker mechanic said, as he reached out to accept Titus's extended handshake. "Bleach, right?" "Yep. So you need help getting your gear out of the back?" "Yeah, Tommy and Gino are about 15 minutes behind us, and I don't want to wait around for them to get everything set up. We're doing this over near the edge of the lawn, right? Over that way?" he asked, pointing off to one side of the house. Titus looked over and spotted a clutch of extension cords that the Kincaid sisters had pulled out in advance for the party's live entertainment. "Indeed. Point and shoot, guys," Titus said. He followed Lynn to the back of the van, and when she opened the rear doors, he immediately grabbed up the 2 tower-style amps, one in each arm, and started lugging them over toward the side yard. Henry grabbed his guitar and Tommy's bass, while Lynn took the mic and several cables in hand behind him. When Henry and Lynn got over to Titus, Lynn clucked sidemouth at Titus. "Good Lord, T, how much are you benching these days?" she asked, giving him a faux flirtatious waggle of her bushy eyebrows. "About 800, 5 reps, Titus answered with a light chuckle. "I was just kidding," said Lynn. "He wasn't," Henry remarked, shaking his head. "It's a head trip sometimes, trying to remember that you are quite literally not human, big man." "Well, I mean, neither is she," Titus quipped, pointing at Lynn. "Which reminds me, you had your shots lately?" Lynn snickered while playfully swatting at him and snapping her teeth, and the three of them headed back to the van for Titus to requisition Gino's drum set. As he turned the kick drum toward himself, Titus paused, looking at the band name insignia that Henry had finally had paint printed on the surface of the cover. Pack of Punks, scrawled in the style of a spray paint graffito. Nice. Where'd you get it done? Chambers Music. The owner's daughter is a graphic designer, Henry said. He had her do it for me to pay for tuning up his car. Kind of a barter exchange. Always nice when you can work things out like that. Is this everything from the van? There's just a cooler with some bottled water and some beers we're going to keep near the setup, Lynn said. I'll get that, T. Thanks. And hey, tell Mish you guys look great. Titus nodded, ambling his way back toward the porch, taking a look around at the smattering of guests on the porch and in various conversations around the yard and driveway. There were some genuinely tremendous costumes on display, and he admired the effort that probably went into a lot of them. But a curious observation wormed its way into his thoughts, one he hated having crop up, as it struck him as deeply unfair to even observe. Mish and I are the only non-humans here. He detested thinking about his otherness when he was in social settings, because he had done his level best to assimilate, to fit in with his surroundings. True, he couldn't very well help his greater size, strength, and overall physiological differences from his peers, but he had always gone out of his way to try and make these elements a non-factor. Yet even now, he found himself thinking about the guests at this very Halloween party, who were trying to depict characters in popular anime and manga who, in their source material at least, were towering figures. None of them would ever, short of massive lifts in their shoes or boots, be able to match the size of those characters. Yet for Titus, the trick was accomplished without a hitch, thanks to the very nature of being a Minotaur. He hadn't even thought about this sort of thing in a few years, he realized, as he climbed the steps of the porch, heading in to grab himself another beer. Then Ashkar showed up, he thought, a scowl pinching his features. Daddy dearest. Titus halted in his tracks, halfway across the living room of the Kincaid house, and looked down at the empty beer bottle in his hand. It was only his first, he realized, mulling over his sudden flush of irritation. Setting the bottle down on a nearby end table, he asked around after Misha, and one of the other partygoers directed him toward the downstairs bathroom. He spotted her standing third in line outside of the lone bathroom on the first floor, and he made his way quickly over to her, stooping down and pitching his voice low, so that hopefully nobody else would overhear his question. Hey, Mish, does having this spell work on us make us more, susceptible to the effects of alcohol? Misha snapped her fingers, eyes wide in sudden recollection. Shit, right, it does, she said, turning slightly toward him. Her own beer was still in hand, but was only about a quarter drained. Then again, she's also much smaller than me, Titus mused. Right, so you and I should probably try to pace ourselves. There's soda in the fridge and the coolers in the kitchen too, though, so we should be okay. Are you feeling okay, T? Yeah, just a little on edge after finishing that first one. I was starting to worry that I'd turn complete pussy somehow, or that somebody roofied me, he said with a shake of the head. All right, sorry to bug you, hon. I'm going to go grab a soda then. Can you grab one for me too? She asked as the line moved forward. Yeah, I'll be out on the porch. Henry and Lynn are getting set up out in the yard. Titus maneuvered his way to the kitchen, snagged a couple of Cokes out of the fridge, and then marched out to the porch, spotting and claiming a temporarily open spot along the railing that looked out over the band setup. Tommy and Gino still hadn't arrived as yet, but this mattered little to the young Minotaur, who cracked open both Cokes, setting one on the railing for Misha, sipping his own slowly. When the half-elf woman joined him a couple of minutes later, Titus took a look down toward the driveway, where a battered Ford Explorer came rumbling down the dirt drive. After it was parked, Tommy and Gino, looking much like Henry and Lynn in their punker regalia, came ambling over toward the bandmates. I think that other car is probably the pizza, somebody said, pointing toward another vehicle coming down the drive. Misha sighed. Thank God. Chips and pretzels are nice enough, but I want some real food. She patted Titus on the back and asked, Can you even eat anything here? What with a game tomorrow? My metabolism's different, being what I am, Titus replied. He snapped his fingers toward the Faye Valentine look-alike, and when the young woman stepped toward him, he said, You want to let Tabby know the pizza guy's here? A driver and co-worker came out of the sedan, parked right in front of the porch steps, both of them bearing 2 bags full of food up the stairs. Tabitha appeared with the messenger girl a few moments later, and after paying them, she motioned for a couple of guys to take the food inside to the kitchen. Within a few minutes, Titus and Misha had grabbed some grub for themselves and set up on a spare blanket Misha kept stashed in her van on the lawn about 24 yards back from Henry's band. By the time the quartet had finished their sound check, most of the partygoers had gathered on the side yard with their food and drink. Misha took a quick look around, doing a small double-take as she spotted Jeff, dressed up in a costume of Kakashi Hatake from Naruto, taking down his face covering in order to take a bite of pizza. She'd been keeping an active eye out for him since she and Titus had arrived, and now she felt like a fool for not having thought of characters with masks. It was such a simple camouflage, and for an experienced illusionist to have overlooked it, she felt mortified. She only hoped Titus wouldn't spot him. A moment later, such a worry was momentarily forgotten, as Henry grabbed his mic and opened the next part of the party. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 2025 Kincaid Halloween Bash, he began, to which the modest crowd hooted and clapped. We're your entertainment tonight, and we are, he said, taking a step to one side and using a hand to flourish toward the kick drums outfacing cover. Pack of punks. Grab a bite, grab a beer, and let's fucking do this. Misha leaned slightly toward Titus to ask, Are we far enough back that they're not going to blow out our eardrums? Should be, yeah. The opening notes started to play, and Pack of Punks launched into their first tune of the evening. A biker, a baker, a poet who swears, a banker who moonlights as someone who cares. The tinkers, the tailors, the dreamers, and freaks were patchwork people with colorful streaks. It takes all kinds to build this town, climb-ups and crash-downs, the yups and the clowns. We don't match. We're a mess. But my heart still believes this wild harmony's the chaos we need. The skater who shreds with the rainbow hair, the farmer who dances without a care, the loners, the lovers, the brash and the shy. Together we rise, we reach for the sky. With a jagged puzzle, with pieces that clash, a roaring mosaic of beauty and trash. Perfection's boring, so let it all show. In this lovely disorder, we all learn and grow. A teacher who scribbles their lessons in chalk, the kid with the compass who walks their own walk, the fighters, the crafters, the singers and seers. We're brilliant and broken. We triumph in tears. Henry took another swig of his beer and used his free hand to quickly flag down Titus as the Minotaur headed toward the house. Hey man, can you grab me one more slice before we start the second set? Sure thing, dude. Titus navigated his way through the front door once more, on his way to the kitchen, carefully sidestepping around the man in the Kakashi Hatake outfit, willing himself with an effort to not reach his hands out around Jeff's neck and drag him flailing bodily from the house. For Misha's sake, he hadn't told her that he recognized Jeff from the way in which he moved, the sound of his voice through the thin lower face covering, or the small zigzag scar visible just beside Jeff's lone visible eye in his costume. When he'd first spotted Jeff at a distance, near his car, Titus hadn't been certain it was him, having only heard Jeff speaking with another partygoer from a few yards away, his face covered with the mask and eye patch, as well as a hairpiece matching the iconic Naruto character. But as he had learned over the last 3 years and changed from his coursework in law enforcement, even individuals actively engaged in obfuscating their identity, if they weren't absolute professionals of tradecraft, let details slip. Persistence in tailing any suspect was key. Yet, much like in more in-depth law enforcement investigations, it was vital to Titus's purposes that he not spook his target. As such, he'd only taken a couple of steps out of his way at any moment to look for more hints about the person under the Kakashi gear. It had taken less than an hour for him to feel reasonably confident about it being Jeff, after which Titus resumed his expected course for the party's events with one adjustment in mind: to keep himself between Jeff and Misha. Swooping in on the open boxes of pizza on the wide, long kitchen counter, he snagged a paper plate and 3 more slices, then slipped with grace not usually assumed in a man of his race and build back outside, bringing the plate over to Henry. The biker punker took the plate with a nod of thanks, as Titus slid the 3rd slice off the top for himself. "So, your second set, is it more from your album?" he asked. "Better," Henry said after swallowing. "We've got the majority of a second album ready, brother." "Oh, no shit. So I won't have heard this one. That's cool." Titus started back over toward Misha, slowing his approach when he saw her chatting with Katie, who had come to the party done up like Kagome from Inuyasha. He held back a snicker at the children's playset bow and arrows that she had opted for as an accessory. "Hey, Katie," he said with a nod, the bells at the end of his wig's spike-like tips jingling slightly. Katie looked up and let out a little squeak. "Oh, wow, Titus. That's pretty damn good. I was just telling Misha that Gino looks a lot better now that he's put some weight back on," she said, taking a quick look over toward the band's drummer. Gino had been in a car accident a couple of years prior, and during recovery had become borderline addicted to painkillers. Titus hadn't seen him much, but Katie still clung to the crush that she'd had on him since high school, so he trusted her when she had described the whole ordeal whenever he dropped into Denny's for a bite. It had taken some time, apparently, for Gino to get back into a healthy routine, and from the look of the young man, Titus agreed that he looked to be in good condition. "You know, it might be the booze and the enchantments talking here, Katie," Titus rumbled, giving her a wolf's grin. "But have you thought about maybe finally letting him know how you've been feeling now for, 5, 6 years, I think? Mish, is that about right?" "I'm living in a glass house on this one, bud," came the half-elf woman's reply, which left Titus perplexed. "What?" "Never mind. Just don't pick on Katie, okay? She's good people." Titus agreed to let the matter drop, and he settled back down on the blanket next to Misha, while Katie settled in to join them. The entirety of Pack of Punk's second set was all stuff from their newest project, none of which Titus had heard before, and he found it enjoyable, if slightly less endearing to him than Henry and Lynn's first album, Fathers and Sons. He wasn't sure exactly when he passed out, but he slept soundly enough when he did, under a clear night sky.